Hello, and welcome back to the Green Heart Wellbeing Podcast. The last two episodes have done quite well in terms of view and downloads. I mean, quite well for me, not in the scale of other podcasts, but I'm really delighted with, the engagement in the last couple. So it tells me that the kind of themes that I'm talking about in the last two, alternative education, and then also what well-being looks like, and the difference between in-house and external provision. So I think I'm going to kind of try and carry on a little bit on from last week, which is the episode title is Knowing Wellbeing and Carrying Wellbeing. So they're two very different things. So like I talked about before, wellbeing language is everywhere. And obviously, that's my work and my bread and butter. It's like I'm really try and keep my finger on the pulse of like what is happening online and on the ground where I work in Dubai. And I read a lot. I read a lot of what people are posting, what people are sharing. I contribute things online. So, the language is everywhere. Lots of people know the terms and the ideas and like where well-being is heading, maybe research headlines or article headlines. But I think what I want to kind of chat about in this episode is like carrying the psychological responsibility of well-being implementation in a workplace, in an organisation, in a school. I'm really lucky because I've also had an insight not into just education, but also spending a couple of years working in a mental health and wellbeing clinic. And watching how the clinicians and the therapists, the psychologists, the doctors, how they all carry the weight of the work that they do, and it's a lot. And it's similar to teaching in the way it's like it's a helping profession. So there's so much responsibility, there's so much to carry. Yeah. So I think the main talking point of this episode is going to be about the difference between the awareness of well-being and then being accountable for its impact, whether that's in a school or, if you're the well-being person within your industry. That's something that I'm becoming way more familiar with when I'm starting to learn about organisational well-being or, different initiatives that are happening in various workplaces and industries. There's like well-being directors, there's health and wellness individuals that are maybe working within something like finance, but that's part of their role. So yeah, that's what I'm going to chat about today. So like always, I'm referring to my scribbly notes here that I've put on my screen. What does knowing well-being look like? Yeah, so I'm actually reading a really lovely book about well-being literacy. So I talk a lot about emotional literacy, and now I've kind of moved more into the study of what well-being literacy actually is. So we understand the language, we can articulate our experience of well-being to another person and what it looks like for us. Most of us now are starting to recognise the importance, specifically within industry, even if it's still at the stage of tick box and tokenistic. It's all right because it's part of the process. You've got to go through that stuff and realise that actually it's not enough and it doesn't work before then the real application and implementation and strategy and policy and everything changes. So people are starting to recognise the importance. And I think we're all starting to agree that well-being of the human being matters, and it is becoming more of a responsibility within workplaces. So I think collectively there's a really lovely, cognitive awareness of what well-being is. And again, it's like such a huge continuum, and there's so many variants of what well-being looks like. And more recently I've started really clarifying what I talk about when I say well-being, and I'm referring to like well-being science and positive psychology and human flourishing And then I might speak with someone who talks about wellness in a holistic sense and might be doing energy healing work and different things. So it's now becoming important to clarify like which area of wellness you're focusing on, because it is becoming more nuanced and people are looking for different things. So I think now like there's such a umbrella cognitive awareness of wellness, which is great. But when we're thinking about it from like maybe a positive psychology lens, like I said, it's reminding ourselves that awareness of the themes and awareness of the need for care and well-being doesn't change the behaviour. So the awareness isn't enough. Again, like I say, there's a process. Awareness is like the first part of it. So it's in remembering that it's then the next parts that start to build the change. So insight without practice, it doesn't change the habits or relationships or nervous systems and things like that. So when I talk about my masters, which I know I talk about all the time, and I don't want to be that person that does that, but what I really look back on, and I didn't know it at the time or recognize or realize at the time, but it's called the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology. So there's the whole application part of it. And you know, that's where the application, what I've just talked about there, like the practice, that's the key bit in making the change. So the knowing of it is reassuring, and the knowing or the awareness of well-being and its possibilities for our mental health and well-being and moving towards flourishing is reassuring. It's like a comfort and it's a hug to know that it's there and it's an option. But that knowing alone doesn't help you in the moment, you know, unless then you've got the practices or strategies or, you know, support already in place. That's the stuff that will help you in the moment. So I think when I talk about carrying well-being, what it actually requires, and this is like, you know, if you're a well-being person in your company or you're a clinician or a coach or whatever it might be, you know that there's an element of carrying things. Counsellors especially. When I think about counsellors that I know that work in schools, and again, I've talked about like how their caseloads are overflowing with people within the school, kids, staff. You know, it's a lot for them to hold. And again, I'll talk about this later on, but that's where like burnout and stuff starts to happen. But yeah, it's like it's a heavy thing to carry. And again, teachers will be able to relate, because you know that you're not just teaching academics, you are, you know, supporting relational things that happen between children. You're helping develop friendships, you're supporting social skills, you're helping a kid when they're upset, you're making sure they eat. Like there's all this human stuff around it. So anyway, that's what I mean about carrying all those things are a lot. But from positive psychology and a coaching psychology lens, it's about emotional regulation, not just emotional awareness. So when I talk about emotional literacy and all the work that I do with the little kids in school, and a lot of the nursery groups especially, that's very much becoming aware and familiar with the language. Like the regulation part comes later than that. The regulation part comes when they're able to understand the emotions, connect them to their own self, mentally and physically. And then we can teach the skills of emotional regulation. But again, when you think about adults, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day, like we all know adults who find it tricky to regulate emotions, you know, whether it's someone you see having a full-blown fit of road rage in the traffic. It's like, well, you can see that there's regulation needed there, you know, and we can probably pinpoint in our own life or personality where it's trickier for us to regulate emotions. So the learning there is the regulation and learning to use it in the moment. So again, that kind of stuff takes practice. And if somebody is carrying the responsibility of helping children develop emotional regulation, or it's within a clinical environment, or a workplace environment. Like, it's a big thing to support with, and again, because it is so human, we don't all completely regulate in the same way. We can use tools and strategies that are similar, but again, it's like the consistency of practice to do that. And again, when we think about like a mindset change, we often hear about mindset. Schools now are all more or less teaching the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset, which is amazing. We see it in so many different groups, like sports, finance, whatever it is. But then we also kind of need to, again, move beyond that. So the mindset change is like the first step. And then the next step you're going to take is looking at the behaviour change. And when I think about children, and I wrote this recently in an interview, I'll share the link to that once it's published. It's like when it comes to children, the adult modelling and a regulated adult also supports children to be regulated, because then they're looking at the adult and they're learning, like, by proxy from that adult's way of being and how they regulate and how they move around. So again, when you're thinking about being a teacher or a counsellor or the wellbeing person, that is something that you're carrying. You're having to carry this way of being because it directly impacts the people in your orbit, in your wellbeing orbit. So that's something that it probably would be a requirement, when you think about, like, if you've got a therapist or coach or whatever, and they're not displaying those types of things. I'm not saying everyone has to be like all chill and quiet and calm, but I just mean in terms of regulation, like clarity, direct, being able to articulate their thoughts. It rubs off on you, and that's something that you're able to do your better work through when someone's reflecting that sense of being to you. So yeah, I think they're kind of important points to mention about what carrying well-being looks like. Another thing that I've written down is, like, I've doodled soft skills. I also talked about this in the interview. It's like pastoral care, PSHE, well-being, also mindfulness is underestimated. It's often called soft skills, and honestly, there's nothing soft about it. Like, being human is hard and messy and can be all over the place, and we experience so many different things. So yeah, like, I think it's not soft. I get why it was maybe called that for a long time, but I feel like it can be really underestimated. And something that I find in schools, like when it's an add-on or anywhere where well-being's an add-on, it's like, oh, it's nice to have, but actually, like, it should be there. It's not just nice to have. Like, I think maths is nice to have, but now computers will do all that for me. So it's that kind of thing. So well-being is relational, it's human, it's connected, and also then that kind of opens it up for an assumption that it's intuitive. And it's not always. Like, things can be taught, like empathy can be taught. It's not just a natural thing. You can support children and adults to increase and enhance and develop their empathy. So psychologists have written here, a lot of psychology papers and just general day-to-day living shows us that lots of adults weren't taught regulation skills. We learned from the adults around us. And when I say we, I'm probably referring to, like, me being a geriatric millennial. It's like, I'm 40 now. But when I think about some of the primary teachers that I had, I can now look back and be like, yeah, she was a really regulated person. And I can think of another one who was like, she was absolutely not a regulated person. But we learn from our parents, our siblings, the adults around us, So if you think about now, children starting to learn about emotional literacy, emotional regulation and everything in a education environment, what would they be like when they came out the other end of education? Like totally different species of humans from like my age. And I'm generalizing, but I think you get what I mean. Yeah, and when we're stressed, there's that kind of takes up so much space. So it reduces the access to the empathy and the reflection time that we have. Even when I do the little clubs with school and I know that the kids aren't stressed, but they're busy, you know, and by the time they get to me at the end of the day and we talk about how do we feel, majority of them will say tired, hungry, and then a lot of the time they're like all over the place, you know, because it's like that they need to get the silliness out. Their mind is almost like monkey mind, because they've been so busy the whole day and they haven't had a moment to actually sit and properly regulate themselves. So we often have like a few minutes of let's just roll around and be silly, let's do whatever we want, chat and do whatever, and then we have some breathing time, and then they're ready to be in the room for that little session. So when I talk about stress reduces access to empathy and reflection, I was meaning like the kids haven't actually had time to reflect or be in their inner world to find out how they are, what feeling is there. So if you think about adults, you know, when we're stressed and rushing around trying to get everything done, then we're not making space for the other things. So again, when you think about when I'm saying about underestimating that stuff, just imagine what a day would look like if you had, you know, make space for yourself throughout the day, even short pockets of time. It would feel different from a typical rushed, busy, hectic day. What have I said here about coaching psychology? Yeah, and I do this myself a lot. This is something that I'm kind of working on when I think about coaching psychology, and this is definitely a newer field and can be a bit underestimated. But again, it matters because generally we're way more used to the idea of having like therapy and talking therapies and support and things like that. Typically when things tend to go wrong, fewer people will have just a general therapist, even when they're content and everything's going relatively well. People then might not consistently continue with talking therapy, because it tends to be perceived it's like when something goes wrong, let's go and see it. But the coach, again, like I always really mean it when I say everybody can benefit from having a coach in some area of life, because that is what helps support towards or along the continuum towards flourishing. We don't just need to be doing good or doing great. We can continue to move towards flourishing and having even more abundance in whatever area it is, and living a good life. So I've talked before about eudaimonia, and it's one of my favorite words, and it's like living a good life. So I went on a tangent there, but what I wanted to say was something that I continue to work on is the patterns. I really often repeat patterns in my work life, professional life, personal life. And yeah, it's like when you're under pressure or under stress, that becomes like a default reaction. So I think when I'm talking about this work, well-being, and the application of it and moving beyond the awareness, that's where like the work is. The work is to eradicate those unhelpful patterns, you know. And when you're in the well-being space and you're providing strategies or coaching sessions or whatever to help do that, it's hard, you know, and that moves beyond the awareness. So then there's like, I was speaking with someone, I have a business coach now, and she's helping me no end, and it's just great to learn from someone who's done a lot of things in like an entrepreneurial space. And we were mentioned something the other day about being an entrepreneur or a founder. It's like, you know, and I try to be really transparent and share a lot of the hard stuff as well as the good stuff. But even within that, there's so much behind the scenes, like so much unseen graft that happens. And it's kind of relentless, you know. It's like if you're not looking in this area, you're looking at this area, but while you're looking at this area, you've got one part of your mind back on that area because you're trying to do everything. And I also think that well-being work has this invisible load behind it. So when it's known and it's not properly held, there's some points that I want to mention about it. Okay, so one of the first ones is, and I get quite snippy about this, it's like, I have studied wellbeing science for a long time, like, I don't even know, I graduated in 2020, we're now in 2026, so started in 2017. So almost 10 years I've been studying wellbeing science. I've been implementing it, applying it in different industries, putting it into practice, learning, talking, immersing myself in it. So there's all of this graft behind what I do and what I share and what I offer. And, what I mean is, when I get snippy about it, it's like, when someone tells me, oh yeah, we've started a wellbeing initiative, we gave everybody a plant, I'm like, okay, that's really nice, but it's not the kind of wellbeing that I'm talking about. And then when I feel like sometimes I would be dismissed or discarded because, oh, we're already doing wellbeing, and I'm like, well, you're not, so that's what I mean about being snippy. But within industries, the emotional labour of wellbeing will fall on a few individuals until it reaches the point where it's systemic and part of the ecology of the industry and just alive through everything that happens. So it tends to be then the emotional labour of it and the heaviness and the people carrying it. It's just a small group of people. And that also then becomes difficult for them. So that's part of the invisible load of wellbeing work, and also trying to make it work. Like, I remember in school, and I was trying to get various things off the ground, and coaching was one of them, and it just didn't happen at the time. And it's like, I would hold that really dear and be like, I'm really trying to get it done, but again, that's something that those individuals will experience. It's like the pushback, or there not being enough time, or whatever it is. The other thing I've written here is about the inconsistency. So part of the load of wellbeing work, whether it's in a school or an industry, is getting buy-in. And that is one of the hardest things. So when you think about, say, a school that's got, 60 teachers or 100 teachers, all the teachers have had wellbeing training, they've learned about teacher wellbeing, everything's been provided for them first. There's still going to be 100 different levels of understanding, implementation in their own lives. And I've said this before, wellbeing's not prescriptive, but it's like having the exposure to all the different supportive things and picking what works for you. But then there would be a natural disposition to lean towards that when it comes to the introduction of wellbeing support for the kids. So yeah, that can lead to like inconsistent response. Inconsistent. I want to say receiving, that's not the right word. Inconsistent offerings of the wellbeing initiatives or strategy or curriculum, whatever it is, to the children. I hope that makes sense, what I've said. So what I'm trying to get at is that load falls on the wellbeing person within the industry to ensure the consistency, and that's hard. Like, that's a hard thing to hold. Making sure that everyone understands it, is receiving it. If they're not, why not? And how can we improve it? And what can we offer that gives them the same experience or subjective wellbeing opportunity, that then by proxy the children will benefit from. So yeah, that's one of the other things. And then again, the leaders that carry the responsibility and without support, or they might have the support, from a manager or a leader or whatever, but that leader or manager might have 8 other things that they're responsible for. So you might have that responsibility, but then feel a little unheard or unseen or unable to get things moving the way you want to, because again, there's a hierarchy, So that's some of the invisible load of well-being, and you think about that even psychologically or mentally for the person who's trying to carry it. So when I think about matured well-being, or practice or things that I know have went really well, and I was speaking with somebody who actually works in insurance, but they're in a wellbeing division of it, and they are like a connector between clients and the insurance company to support with different wellbeing aspects. And it was really lovely to hear her talking about like the data and bespoke provision and what that looks like. So when I think about stuff like that I've seen that works really well, and then also within my own work, when I'm thinking about positive psychology and coaching psychology, it's fewer initiatives. It's not like ticking off all the awareness days and making sure we all wear green on one day and whatever. And those things are lovely, but it needs a deeper integration. And that's the maturation of a well-being ecology, which is my favourite word today. But like, when you just think about that, you know, and how it all connects in, everything connects with each other, like nature, you know, when you think about forest and how interlinked all the different parts are. So it is fewer initiatives and deeper integration. My master's research into teacher wellbeing, one of the main themes that came out from flourishing teachers was psychological safety for adults. Like, if you feel fearful, if you feel anxious around the boss, if you feel scared of a leader, especially if you're an expat, because that leader's in control of your livelihood and whether you stay next year, and there's no unions in some countries, so you know your whole being depends on that person essentially. So psychological safety matters. Another thing that really is a mature well-being or a well-developed well-being, what's the word, not initiative, okay, practice, like clarity around roles and responsibilities. Like, there's a few times over the years I've actually written my own job description for well-being roles, because I'm like, here is what I can do, this is what I want to do, here's the time that I need for it, and this is how I'm going to do it. And that made it clear for me, as I know I don't want to be part of like whatever it might be, you know, hiring the ice cream van so everyone can have an ice cream on a Friday. Like, that's nice. And maybe another one I remember in another school was like parking. People were talking about how parking was impacting their well-being, and I'm like, yeah, that's a problem, but you know, that's facilities and it can impact part of the job, but actually I'm talking about a different element of well-being. So that wouldn't fall under my roles and boundaries and responsibilities, if you know what I mean. The other thing around that, again, and counsellors can be really great at this, is boundaries, like professional boundaries, and being like, I can't take on anymore, because then the children that are in my care or the clients that are in my care aren't getting the best. So boundaries are important. And also then another good thing about like mature well-being, embedded well-being practices, is like reflection and taking time to assess and evaluate and discuss and learn from what's happened so far, and then thinking about what would ideally come next. So it doesn't always need to be action, action, action. It's important stuff, so there's time to like be in it and learn from how it's going. And a lot of that to me is qualitative. You know, there's this whole constant demand for data and numbers and figures, and I still find this wild in education, you know, that we're putting numbers on kids and they're in this percentage of the assessment, or they're in this percentage of like high achieving or whatever it is, and I'm like, they're humans, so talk to, you know, like I'm always, even all my studies and research was always qualitative. There obviously, I know there's a place for quantitative data, but for me I prefer it. But I'm like, there's a lot of relational work that can happen, and communication and connection and learning through reflection by talking and what happens. So I think another thing is accepting that this work is slow and relational. To be impactful, it needs time to grow like a plant. Like, it needs the right conditions, and it needs support, and it needs tending to. And I think that that's one of the things that mature well-being implementation does. It like values the depth and the integration rather than the display, like the jazz hands, which happens everywhere, and we know it does, but we all see it and, you know, we just carry on. So a lot of it's great and some of it looks lovely, but then the other part is, okay, that's like getting into the granular, like nitty gritty, and that's where I love being. You know, I love to be in like the hard messy bit and be like, how can we make this work? It's like a lovely challenge within an organization to be like, let's really make it work, like let's really go for it and make a difference to the people that are experiencing the overall well-being provision. Okay, so just kind of going full circle, I've talked a lot again, this one's half an hour long, but the work that I love lives in the application. So even when I'm talking about nursery groups or primary ECA club groups, and also if you're listening to this and you're in a school in Dubai, get in touch, because next term I'll have some more spaces for after school wellbeing clubs. And it's in the application. So even though those are really fun little clubs, or there's a story or a craft or something, it's applied positive psychology, but translated in a way that kids can receive it and learn from it. So yeah, to me, there's a real sustainable element of this. And obviously I don't mean sustainable in the sense like recycling and stuff like that. That's like, well, you know, another part that I would love to be involved in one day. But I guess I'm talking about the sustaining and maintaining well-being within organizations, because very often it becomes like, oh yeah, we did that once, or we used character strengths for a while, but then it kind of disappeared. It's the consistency that makes it grow. So yeah, well-being isn't something that we understand. The awareness has improved collectively, which is amazing. The different areas of well-being are now starting to have like their own field, and they're connected but different, which is nice. And I think it's beginning to understand the different areas of wellness and well-being. And it's a practice. It's like mindfulness practice. Well-being practice is now becoming more of a thing, because it's not just something you put on like a jumper, you know, and you don't just lift a weight 3 times and the muscle is expanded or growing. It's like, it's the practice of it, the continuation of it, maintaining and sustaining. So awareness is a vital strong point, a vital starting point, but responsibility and carrying and getting the right people and finding matches that make it grow effectively within your life, your personally, professionally, within the workplace or organization. Otherwise, it just becomes words, and words are beautiful and words are lovely, but it's not enough. So thanks for listening to my podcast again today, or my rant. Maybe it was a rant rather than a podcast. As always, get in touch, tell me what you like, what you didn't like, what you want to talk about next. Visit my website, there's more things on there all the time. And yeah, I think soon I'll do a bit more behind the scenes business episodes to just kind of share what it's like being a founder in Dubai. And yeah, take care.